see what we've got in store and see the 70% design. And let's just go ahead and get into our meeting. I'd like to introduce you all to Lily DeFord. She is a member of our local chapter here and community. Lily grew up in Maryland, and she grew up as part of a family that farmed there in Maryland, so she was always really connected to the land. That was probably the most important thing to say about her. She was a farmer, grew up in a good farming family. And you know, I just want to say, it's like we really here in this valley need to reflect on that, of the history of this valley. A lot of the human history has been farming, and we're losing that farmland at an incredible rate. And you know, we need to look at the value of our farmlands and our wetlands that are mingled in with those, and how the two can work together. Wetlands protect farms, providing you know, groundwater in adjacent land. Lily earned her bachelor's degree and master's degree at MSU in bioresource engineering. She did some of her study work on the restoration of Story Mill Park, and she is now the restoration director for the Gallatin Watershed Council. And I just want to, like, you know, take this time to point out how this wetland initiative that Sacagawea Audubon has undertaken, we're really pulling a lot of partners. We have partnered with the Gallatin Valley Earth Day event, the Gallatin Watershed Council, several other groups, Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited. So we're really trying to do a lot of work together by all of us, all the different groups that really support the protection of land. I would encourage you to go to our website and look at everything we've been doing lately. One of our other kind of organizations we've worked with is Montana Native Plant Society. So we got to do a lot of cross-pollination there with the Montana Native Plant Society. Go and check out all the different work we're doing in collaboration with others. And one of the big things with Lily, the way I met her, is she has now joined the Sacagawea Audubon Society Wetland Preservation Project Committee. So she's right there in the forefront with us. So everyone, I don't know that you have the ability to let everyone clap. We'll clap for it at the end, but we give a big welcome to Lily DeFord.
Thanks so much, Chris. Yeah, let's see if I can get this presentation up and going. And can everybody see? Let's see.
We see the first slide right now.
Great. So it's showing that on my side, it's showing that it's paused. There, that should do it.
And then there you go. And then just hit the.
Okay. So thanks everybody for coming. And we're talking about wetlands and what's in it for us. And so wetlands, how wetlands impact water quality and quantity, and why we need them across the landscape. They provide a lot of benefits for us. And so this is really a selfish presentation. And this is this slide, I really like this image because this is a picture taken by Chris Boyer with Kestrel Aerial. And this is a picture of the East Gallatin River during spring runoff in May 2008. And for reference, the typical base flow for the East Gallatin River, so that's after spring runoff from about late June through April, is about 50 cubic feet per second. And so when I say cubic feet per second, think about 50 basketballs of water going by every second. And in this photo, the East Gallatin River is running at 1900 cubic feet per second. And so you can see how far-reaching the effects of flooding are. And I also really like how it shows a story and a history of the river. You can see all these old channel scars. Rivers move, and this shows how far that river actually migrates across the landscape. And it makes you feel, I think, pretty small, and to see how powerful the river is. So keep this in mind when we talk about flooding throughout the presentation, and what that really looks like here for us. Let's see. I am not able to move my presentation forward. Is that something, Travis, is that something that you can help me with?
I'm not sure. Try double clicking the slide.
Let's see. Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, so in this talk, my objective is to convince you that every wetland counts and it should stay right where it is. So with the Gallatin Watershed Council, with the Sacagawea Audubon Society and a couple other groups, recently provided comment to the Gallatin County Growth Policy. And something that struck me when going through that process of providing comment, I also read a lot of other people's comments. And that policy, I think, was a really collaborative effort and represents community priorities. And I saw over and over again in the comments and in the content of that growth policy that people in our community really love the natural beauty, the open space, and the recreational opportunities that are available in our area. And that's really central to our identity. But it's also really important to remember that not only are our natural resources something to enjoy and take pleasure in, but they also provide critical ecosystem services. And so that means benefits to you and me, and that a healthy natural world is the cornerstone of a healthy and productive community. The natural world supports public health and safety, a thriving economy, farming and ranching, and wetlands are the cornerstone of this cornerstone. So most people here tonight already know that wetlands, one of the ecosystem services that they provide is habitat. About 90% of all of Montana's wildlife depend on wetland and riparian areas for at least part of their life cycle. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore tonight because you guys are experts on that. But they also provide flood and drought resilience, and they protect and enhance water quality in our streams and rivers. So wetlands are really a buffer to climate change, growth, and development, which we are definitely experiencing here. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So wetland service number 1, flood and drought resilience. Almost all of our water, this is Blackmore Peak here, so almost all of our water are for our drinking, our fishing, growing kale, potatoes, whatever, flowers, comes in the way of snowpack. So let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to navigate. Okay. Oh, well, it jumped ahead to my punchline. Anyway, so these any snow that falls here on top of, say, Blackmore Peak in January might be your glass of water by August. So the longer that we can keep it on the landscape, we don't ship it all out of town by July, the less big and scary our flooding is in the spring and the longer we can irrigate and fish into the summer and fall. So I'm going to tell you a story of 2 raindrops. Let's see. And the first raindrop is going to fall on the Inderland Audubon Wetland Preserve. So I know there's a couple people that might be on the call tonight who are maybe unfamiliar with the project that Sacagawea Audubon Society is doing, but this is a brave undertaking of restoring a degraded wetland in just to the east in the city limits of Bozeman, and it's connected to the East Gallatin River. So any water that comes into the Inderland Audubon Wetland Preserve is going to eventually end up in the East Gallatin River. And so maybe this comes in as rain, maybe it comes in as snow, but a raindrop that falls here and this is going to eventually make its way down into the groundwater profile and take this long circuitous route to the East Gallatin River. And it's important to note that a wetland, 1 acre of wetland, can store approximately 1 million gallons of water. So for you farmers and ranchers out there, that's 3 acre-feet of water. And so it's going to take, some of that might show up in the East Gallatin River later that day, and then some of it will take all summer, adding to the flow into late into August when we need it most. And along the way, it's providing ecosystem services. So here it's sub-irrigating a riparian area, providing habitat. It's also sub-irrigating crops, and then it's providing habitat for a healthy fishery in the East Gallatin River. So what does that mean for flow and flooding in the creek itself? So when we talk about flow in a creek, we measure that in a hydrograph. So on your left here is a hydrograph, and we've got time along the x-axis, and we've got flow rate on the y-axis. So as we see flooding events, like spring runoff, that hydrograph goes up, the flow rate goes up with time, and then it comes back down later in the summer. So we get, here's our flooding event, spring runoff. We're getting up to 800 cubic feet per second. And then later in the summer, what's left over is our drought resiliency. And when we have wetlands on the landscape, that hydrograph is the impacts of flooding is dampened over time, and we have a nice spread out hydrograph. So raindrop number 2. This raindrop falls instead on a city street in Bozeman, and it goes directly into the stormwater system. And it's important to note that in Bozeman, our stormwater system is separate from our wastewater system. So our stormwater goes directly into our streams and rivers, much of it receiving little to no treatment. So please keep that in mind. That's very important, because anything that falls on our streets ends up right in our rivers. So this process takes minutes to hours, so very different. And when we look at that hydrograph, we're seeing much flashier flood events. So everything is arriving, all that water is arriving in that river system at once. And then nothing is left over at the end of the season. And this is where we start to see algal blooms and hoot owl restrictions. So yeah, you can see how that really tightened up the hydrograph. And so when we put that together, we see these flashier systems in the urban environment and a more dampened impact as soon as we add those wetlands on the landscape. So each wetland removed from the landscape, so now let's talk about the cumulative impacts. So each wetland we remove from the landscape is the loss of approximately 1 million gallons of water storage. So think of them as lots of little mini reservoirs across the landscape. And the Gallatin watershed is suffering a slow death by 1,000 cuts. Each wetland removed from the landscape. So here we've got some farming, we're shifting that hydrograph, and we're increasing our flood risk and we're decreasing our drought resilience. Here we've got old Buffalo Wild Wings, maybe a subdivision, and each time we shift that hydrograph a little bit. And before you know it, that 2008 flood that I showed you is a more normal occurrence. We see that return interval, it's coming, it's more likely that that's sort of the new normal. Bozeman is trying to find another source of water to support our growing demand. Well, when you take these mini reservoirs off the landscape, we're essentially working against ourselves. So now I want to move from my abstract sketches into real life and tell you a cautionary tale of cumulative impacts adding up in a big way. So this is Ellicott City, Maryland, and they're on the Patapsco River. And these images were taken after a big flooding event in 2016, and then again in 2018. These guys are experiencing more frequent and flashier catastrophic flooding events, in part because of climate change and in part due to all of the land conversion. The watershed for the above Ellicott City is 1/3 impervious. So engineers ran a model of the flood under current conditions and under natural conditions pre-build out. And they found that for each acre of land conversion, that equated to 0.08 cubic feet per second increase in this flooding event, which sounds small until you add that up over the watershed. And cumulatively, that equated to 4,800 cubic feet per second, or a 20% increase in flow rate, or 2 feet of additional flooding in the streets and homes and businesses in Ellicott City. These guys are looking at a $140 million flood mitigation infrastructure upgrade. So how about that for taxes? They are also considering relocating the entire town, but a lot of people are fed up and they're not going to wait around. They are unable to get flood insurance, and residents and businesses are cutting their losses and moving away. So sort of the life of the city is deflating, which is really sad because it's a beautiful historic city in Maryland. So if we apply those same metrics to Bozeman and the East Gallatin watershed, it's hard to make a direct comparison because we are very different, but we're actually a similar drainage area. Patapsco drainage above Ellicott City is 285 square miles, where the East Gallatin watershed is 230 square miles. And when they, so if we were to apply that same 0.08 cubic feet per second increase per acre of land conversion, so we apply that to the Bozeman scenario, let's just say Bozeman grew by 6%, which is a very likely scenario. We all know how quickly Bozeman is growing. So if we increase just Bozeman's impervious surfaces by 6%, that's a 0.5% increase an impervious area across the watershed. And that would contribute 50 cubic feet per second increase to the East Gallatin River during a flood event, which is quite a bit when you're talking an average flow rate of 150 cubic feet per second. So what I'm trying to say is that little bit by little bit, it really adds up. So let's not be like Ellicott City. And so Bozeman is mostly out of the floodplain, so we're pretty safe. But Three Forks, on the other hand, is not out of the floodplain. They're in the floodplain, and the entire Gallatin watershed converges on Three Forks. And they feel the impacts of everything that happens upstream of the Gallatin, upstream on the Gallatin, the Jefferson, and the Madison. So every wetland that we remove when we're building Bozeman out and the triangle area out, we're screwing those guys over, and we're exacerbating those flood conditions that are already predicted to be pretty bad. Three Forks, according to this article, is looking at a $5 million flood mitigation infrastructure upgrade, and relocating the town is part of that conversation. So to conclude the Wetlands Services #1 flood and drought resilience, rain and snow are inherently dispersed impacts, and wetlands provide free dispersed storage that help flatten that hydrograph curve and provide both flood protection and drought resilience. Okay, wetland service #2, water treatment. So wetlands, unlike other ecosystems on the landscape, are uniquely suited for filtering and treating water, which makes sense because we have soil erosion is a natural process. So soil erosion and deposition, nutrient cycling are all part of life. Nature is well equipped to deal with that. So essentially, everybody poops. But too much sediment, too much nitrogen and phosphorus can change a river's ecosystem to the point where it's no longer habitable to life, and it's icky, unsafe to swim in, and it makes drinking water a much more difficult process for treatment. Let's see. So what I'm going to do is talk about a couple different things here. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey, so stick with me. But first, we're going to talk about water quality. What is it? And sources of pollution. We're going to talk about how that pollution gets into our waterways and how wetlands are super good at providing treatment to make sure that we are protecting our water quality. So when we talk about water quality, that could mean a whole host of different things. Microplastics, for example, are coming under a lot of, a lot of people are talking about them. I am not going to talk about pharmaceuticals, hydrocarbons, E. coli, and microplastics because I don't know very much about them. But I am going to really hone in on nitrogen because it's pretty ubiquitous, and that's what I know the most about. And we'll touch on phosphorus, sediment, temperature, and dissolved oxygen. So I think that this is really interesting. We have nutrient standards, and these are set by Montana Department of Environmental Quality. And these are a target threshold that we don't want to go above, a concentration that we don't want to go above in our rivers and streams. And they are based on the beneficial use of a water body. And what that means is beneficial uses are valuable characteristics of a stream that contribute to human welfare. So that's drinking water, recreation, fish, and aquatic life. And the intent, so the basis of the water quality criteria is to assure a level of water quality that will protect these beneficial uses. And so at high enough concentrations, pollutants, so nitrogen, can be harmful in and of themselves, but even at low concentrations, too much nitrogen and phosphorus can cause eutrophication. And so eutrophication increases plant and algal growth and decay in a water body. And so in rivers in the Gallatin watershed, particularly because we are in the headwaters, are not well adapted to nutrient inputs and are really sensitive to additional loading. They are what we call a nutrient limited system. So that's the only thing holding back algal growth. So as soon as you add a little bit more in, as soon as you add a little bit more nitrogen, it's fertilizer, boom, you get algal blooms. So this can be a nuisance. So this algae, that's really what we're trying to prevent here with these nutrient standards, is we don't want algal blooms because they're gross, and then also they reduce dissolved oxygen levels, which impact fish and aquatic life. So that's how we got to these nutrient standards. Algae is a complicated, it's a little bit complicated, and so water temperature is, so here's, I have this little infographic here on the left. This is how my brain works, is that I was trying to make this all flow neatly, but it's hard, it's all connected. So not only do nutrients impact algal blooms, but so does temperature, because algae likes warmer water temperatures. And flow rate also has a compounding effect on both temperature and nutrient concentrations. So slower, shallower flows warm water more quickly, and it concentrates any nutrients present. So that algae can, so then we get this algal bloom, and then that algae, it crowds out the fish and bug habitat. So those spawning sites are a little bit more difficult, and we don't have those nooks and crannies in the river's rocky bottom. And so we're shifting that habitat, and then when it dies off and decays, that process actually strips the water column of oxygen. And so the shifting habitat and less oxygen cause fish stress. And so not only is this stuff icky, you don't really want to swim in this, and then it's not exactly, when you've got all this algae, it's not exactly that picturesque riverscape of a river runs through it, which is, I think, what we all want it to be. But it also causes more profound shifts in an ecosystem right on up the food chain. So everybody that eats a fish gets impacted, including us. So this sounds scary. I thought we lived in this pristine, beautiful place. We're in the headwaters. Many of us came from a worse off place. I came from Maryland. But we live in a sensitive place. And turns out when DEQ did a bunch of sampling and studies in 2012, they determined that we actually have 15 sections of impaired creeks across the watershed. So we've got our work cut out for us, we've got some work to do. And so why? Why are these impaired? What are the sources of pollution that are causing these impairments? So when we're talking about pollution from a regulatory world, we break pollution sources down into non-point source pollution and point source pollution. So point source pollution is exactly what it sounds. It's the stuff that comes out the end of a pipe. These sources are regulated and they require a permit, testing, and reporting. Non-point source is everything else. So these pie charts break down what is to blame for nitrogen loading in impaired streams in our watershed. And so here we're looking at the sources of nitrogen on Bozeman Creek, the upper East Gallatin River, and the middle East Gallatin River. And that here, the city of Bozeman, WRF, that's the Water Reclamation Facility or the wastewater treatment plant. And that is the only point source pollution on this on these pie charts here. So really most of this our pollution sources in our waterways are coming from this spread out dispersed impacts that you just can't put your finger on. And I just want to give a shout out to the wastewater treatment plant because these guys really have their work cut out for them. They do an amazing job, but it's a tough one. You know, they are treating effluent to a very high standard. The problem is that they're discharging into a relatively small stream. So that East Gallatin, at times, they're almost doubling the flow in the East Gallatin. So let's take a look at these non-point source categories that are represented on these pie charts. Let's take a look a little bit closer. So we've got our natural background, and that can look like elk poop. It can look like geology. So some geology and soil composition is naturally high in nitrogen and phosphorus. Then we've got our residential development, and we've got our dog poop problem in Bozeman. Everybody's got a dog or two. And it can also be lawn fertilizer. Maybe it's your lawn, maybe it's the golf course. And then subsurface water, wastewater is a big one. So every subdivision that is not, or home and subdivision that is not hooked up to a central treatment facility, you've got your septic system and your drain field, and that's a pretty big contributor especially when those are not maintained. And then of course we've got our agriculture, and that's both livestock and fertilizer for crop production. So let's see. Okay, so it's out there, but I want to talk about the nitrogen cycle and how it goes from these dispersed impacts across the landscape and then makes its way into our streams and rivers. So first, we've got our organic nitrogen, which is tied up with carbon in plants and animals and manure, and that gets broken down by our decomposers, very critical little guys here. That's our worms, our fungi, microbes, and soil bacteria, and they mineralize that organic nitrogen into an inorganic form, or ammonium. And then we can also have ammonium fixed straight from the atmosphere, either from legumes or lightning strikes, which I think is totally crazy. And then we can also apply ammonium directly to the landscape in the form of fertilizer. Ammonium gets transformed in the presence of oxygen into nitrite and then nitrate. And so that happens pretty readily because our typical soil profile and groundwater environment is high in oxygen. So this reaction proceeds pretty quickly. And nitrate is highly soluble. It dissolves into the groundwater and is carried off down the watershed, and now essentially we have a highly mobile liquid fertilizer on the loose, which is fine if you want to grow stuff. So here it gets immobilized again back into its organic form, like this tree. But anything extra winds up in the creek where we don't want to grow stuff, causing algal blooms. Unless there's a wetland in the way to intercept that groundwater flow. And luckily, wetlands are really good at removing nitrates from the groundwater, and they do that a couple different ways. So in wetlands, they have really verdant plant activity, so we have good plant uptake, but then we also have this process called bacterial reduction or denitrification, and that nitrate gets transformed, it gets intercepted and transformed right back into a gas. So N2 gas actually makes up about 80% of our atmosphere and is totally benign. And wetlands do that, which is super amazing. So let's take a deeper dive into that wetland system and talk about why they're so good at this process. And so first, we've got denitrifying bacteria that do that denitrification process. They thrive in the absence of oxygen. And so part of what makes a wetland is its hydrology and its persistently saturated soils, which create an anaerobic environment. So no oxygen, and these denitrifying bacteria really like that type of environment. And they also really like, oops, my animation's off a little bit. Denitrifying bacteria also really like plant root systems. So this is why wetlands are better than your sort of typical pond scenario. So stormwater pond or maybe a reservoir, because of the role of these plant roots. Let's see. Yeah, so we've got our plant roots, and then we also have plant uptake. So wetland plants are especially nitrogen hungry. And wetlands have a variety of ecosystems. So there's diversity, like lots of little micro ecosystems. Even those roots have exudates, oxygen exudates. So that means that if by the time that water makes it to that wetland and it hasn't been fully nitrified, right? We can't have denitrification unless we have nitrification first. So we have the capacity in a diverse ecosystem to also perform nitrification. Extra bonus is that the conditions that cause the hydrology that cause anaerobic conditions also are what make wetlands especially good at carbon sequestration and heavy metal removal. And that's because, so we have carbon, these microbes aren't breaking that carbon down. In the absence of oxygen, it takes them a lot longer to break down that organic matter, and it becomes a carbon sink that it's really cool. If you dig down into wetlands, there's just a ton of organic matter, and sometimes you can find old stuff that's been preserved for a really long time. Just a quick shout out to Alex Wing. He wanted me to make sure that I mentioned wetlands' ability to remove heavy metals, and this is part of the this is the reduction process of sulfide to sulfate, and then sulfate binds with those heavy metals, and that's really critical, especially when we have acid rock drainage and historic mining impacts. So that's all, Alex. Thanks if you're out there. So Okay, another cautionary tale. Again, we go to Maryland. And this is the Chesapeake Bay, and there is so much effort going into restoring the bay and the bay's ecosystem. And it's costing a lot of money. So their target right now by 2025 is to create or reestablish 85,000 acres of tidal and non-tidal wetlands and enhance the function of an additional 150,000 acres of degraded wetlands. And the lesson here is that it is much harder and more expensive to repair and replace wetland services than it is to protect and preserve. Don't fool yourself into thinking that this scene isn't possible here. It takes deliberate stewardship and careful planning. So I will conclude, that concludes our wetland services number 2, water treatment, and I will conclude it much as I did the flooding and drought section. So just like rain and snow, non-point source pollution is inherently dispersed across the landscape, and wetlands provide necessary dispersed treatment to protect the beneficial uses of our streams and rivers. So hang on, you say, because I've talked a lot about how bad it is to remove wetlands from the landscape, but wait a second, I thought they were protected by the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act says there's a no net loss of wetlands. We must replace form and function as close to the impacts as possible. And we do that one of 3 ways. We have mitigation banks. A mitigation bank, this is where there's a net positive creation of wetlands, so that when a developer builds condos and roads on a wetland over here, they pay into this net positive bank, and those credits get spent down over time. In lieu fee, that's where the developer pays a contractor. Shout out to Montana Aquatic Resources Services. They provide this service all over Montana. So the developer pays a contractor, and Mars would then create or enhance wetland acres into the future. Permittee responsible, this is similar, but the developer is on the hook for creating these new acres themselves. And this is happening all over the Gallatin watershed. So here's Bozeman, and we are shipping every degraded or destroyed wetland acre over to Twin Bridges. So we are mitigating our impacts to the Upper Missouri Mitigation Bank in Twin Bridges. This is 70 miles away. It's over the Spanish Peaks, over the tobacco roots, and it's on the Jefferson River. But if you zoom way out, that's all, the Upper Missouri watershed. But hey, we need those services. We need that flood protection. We need that water treatment. And there's poor old Three Forks. All those benefits are going away when we really need them, especially Three Forks down there. So I'm just gonna say one more thing here. So this is why, especially why we need to protect and preserve first and foremost. And second, the Inderland Audubon Wetland Preserve is super important because we need to be investing in our own watershed and not sending these critical services over to somebody else's watershed. So in conclusion, each wetland we remove from the landscape is a deferred cost, which our community will eventually pay for many times over in damages, first in damages, and then in mitigation strategies. Let's learn from other communities that are paying the price to reverse these damages of poor planning. We can try other innovations and solutions, but they all come with compromises. Say, for example, in this table here, down towards the bottom, we have water conservation. Great, that provides great drought resilience and is a very important thing to do. But is it providing water treatment and habitat? No. Wetlands, though, they do it all. And they don't come with this long list of side effects at the end of the commercial. You know, there's none of these unintended consequences like cloud seeding. That sounds scary. But does it provide drought resilience? Yes, maybe. But wetlands, tried, tested, proven, and they do all of these things. And they are really core to what our community has identified as our core values, as can be seen in that growth policy document. So they're the closest thing you're gonna get to having your cake and eating it too. So thank you. That is my presentation, and we can take some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lily. First, I'd like to invite everyone to open their microphones and give Lily, sorry, not Amy, I was just reading Amy's comment. Lily, give Lily a round of applause for this great presentation. There we go.
Sometimes it takes a little bit.
Thank you so much, Lily.
No, that's well done. And you speak at, you know, such a critical time too. I mean, we all kind of know what's coming to Bozeman, and I think the best way to address this is to talk about it. And having these kind of ecosystem services are invaluable. And I like how you really brought in a lot of case studies, essentially. It's, you know, some things that we can't ignore these things because they are so beneficial to us. We use them, we use and we use, and we never, and we take, but we don't give back. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that and know what these services provide for us. So I really like how you tied that in there. That's very good. So yeah, I hope some of you guys saw my comment as Lily was speaking. Feel free to type in any questions in the chat box or in the questions rather. There's a questions tab. And if anybody has any questions and would like to actually say it themselves, we'd love to open up your mic and you can actually ask Lily directly. So.
Yeah, so if you'd like to ask your question directly using your voice, use the raise your hand feature and we can see you and let you ask your question yourself. And Susan Belo just popped her hand open. So Susan, you are now free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay. Lily, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I teach energy and sustainability, and we're talking about water. We'll have Jessica Alstrom speaking tomorrow, but I plan to share some of this information and maybe talk to you about coming to talk to my class. My question is, has this information been presented to Bozeman's commissioners as well as the city's planning staff as well as their advisory board?
Yeah, oh, Susan, that's a great question. You know, not as formally as this, but I say that's an open dialogue. And you know, when our forum so far has been providing comments to the floodplain regulation update and then the growth policy, and then we're also hoping to, or not hoping, we are. The Gallatin Watershed Council is holding a series of strategic planning meetings with all of those folks that you just talked about, to to bring this issue into our growth and development conversation and try to plan together, because water really impacts all of those sectors. Every single one of us is impacted by that. So we're hoping to bring all those folks to the table. But why not do this presentation?
Yeah.
Just like
it might need to be a little bit shorter, but your last slide with the arrow over to Twin Bridges, that was pretty powerful.
Yeah.
thanks, Susan.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we got some other questions here, and I want to try something different, give some preference to those folks that actually want to speak out. It looks like Catherine has her hand raised. Is there a question that you'd like to ask Lily? And if so, just you can unmute yourself.
There you go.
I failed on that. I don't have a question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah.
No, but I do think that our legislature needs to hear this whole program.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
So I had a question, and really it's more about messaging and communication. I too have a dog. I am a guilty bozemanite. I love going for hikes up our drainages, and Sourdough is a great example of a great place to hike with your dog. And in going out with my friends who also have dogs, I've noticed that anytime the dog goes well off trail to poop, they're not so concerned about using bags to pick that up. If it's right on trail, yeah, I'll be a good citizen and I'll scoop that myself. But if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and it's not doing damage in their mind. What I always think of is it's all about concentration of animals, right? So they say, well, it's no different than all these deer out there pooping or the wild wolves out there pooping. And it's like, how many tens of thousands of dogs live in Bozeman and hike these trails and move along this tiny strip right along the river? And what's the concentration of animal feces compared to the natural wildlife being spread across the landscape? And like, how is that impact so different? And not only that, but like, what is different about a pet dog's poop and a wild elk's poop or wolf's poop?
I mean, I don't know technically, Travis. I'm sure we could talk about the diet of our dogs versus that wild wolf. But you're right. I mean, we're essentially creating like a livestock paddock when we're talking about sourdough. And you also think about the hydraulic regime coming down. There's not much slowing the flow there, and so that those nutrients and that dog waste gets mobilized right into the watershed. I would say if, as they're moving off up into the woods, you have a little bit more of a buffering effect by that landscape. But our natural systems are adapted for a herd of elk and not all of these extra impact. Like we're adding and adding layer upon layer. And so we just need to do what we can. And I would also just add, it's probably worse if it's in the bag and you leave it. So if you put it in the bag, take it home. So there's no
I see that all the time, and it kills me. It's like we are now buying plastic to leave it in litter when it could have been decomposed. That's what kills me. I pick those up. Like if I got a hand and if I see one on the trail, I just pick it up because I can't stand to see that.
And I think
People forget, or people take a wrong turn on a trail and they just don't come around. But I get, yeah,
yeah,
I'm with it.
My my
really quick.
solution on longer hikes is I make my dog wear a backpack and keep one of those like clamshell sealed containers in his backpack so he carries his own poop, and I make him pack his own shit.
Yeah, pack it in, pack it out. Yeah, I hear you. But so I had kind of a question. It looks like, or I was just kind of had a thought when you were mentioning the denitrifying bacteria and how like that bacteria likes the wetland areas that have the roots as opposed to like an actual reservoir. And I was thinking, I'm like, it kind of makes sense. I'm like, I wonder if is it more of like kind of like a sub-habitat for these bacteria, or is it something for them to feed on? So, and then it looks like Emma was asking kind of the same question. She wrote, why and how are roots good for denitrifying bacteria?
What's Emma's last name?
Naratsky.
Okay.
Naratsky.
There's an Emma in my graduate wetlands lab, and then I'd just be really busted.
Oh, she was blasting you.
So, I don't think that we completely know, and really the expert on this is a guy named Chris Allen, who works for WGM Group and is a professor or a teacher up at MSU. And the process requires carbon. So denitrification requires carbon, and those roots, the root exudates, but then also as those roots die and regrow, that provides that food for those microbes to move that denitrification process forward. But it's more than that, and like even in the winter. So the Chris did along with others working for Otto Stein for his PhD. They constructed a wetland up at it's called a constructed wetland, and it treats all the secondary wastewater that comes out of Bridger Bowl. So it's a highly concentrated secondary wastewater, and it's all being treated under the snow by a wetland, which is super cool. And I don't know how many people knew that. But even when the plants aren't alive, those denitrifying bacteria really, they've done tests with and without a plant community in that wetland, and it really impacts those denitrifying bacteria through the winter in those colder temperatures. So there's a strong relationship between denitrifying bacteria and the roots. I don't think it's 100% understood, but we'd have to ask Chris.
I wonder if it could be like temperature, because like even though they're not alive at the top, I mean there's still a lot going on in their roots. I don't know. That is kind of interesting. But
yeah, and I believe it's an exothermic reaction. So actually, when they dug down, it's like creates this heat comes off of that wetland, and it actually creates this ice cap and this like little microclimate of like warm exothermic. Yeah, it's a pretty cool community going on there under the snow.
It's like the Simpsons movie,
Yeah.
Living Under the Dome.
yeah.
Let's see here. Kristen asks, how can we get more involved?
Yeah, I think, and Kyle, you touched on this earlier too, and I'm glad you asked that, Kristen, because it takes a lot of work. I think that Travis could speak to this, and Laureen too. Doing a wetland mitigation bank takes a lot of work. Writing to your some other callers talked about educating your legislatures and your representatives, the city council. so it all this takes a lot of work, you know, it's with policy and da 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 da. Anyway, there's a lot of really great groups working on this. You know, Sacagawea Audubon Society is one of them. The Gallatin Watershed Council is another. In the upper watershed, you have the Gallatin River Task Force, Trout Unlimited, Ducks Unlimited. All of these groups are really great groups to get involved with because they're doing sort of the non, right? We're in it for, we don't have ulterior motives. We're in it for the good of our community and the ecosystem. And like, for example, we were talking about dog poop. The Gallatin Watershed Council has a dog poop cleanup volunteer day. And Brooke, are you out there? I think that's on, is that on Earth Day? Uh-oh.
Yeah,
Like you can,
it's Friday.
okay,
At
okay.
3:30 to 6.
Yeah, so volunteer days, tree planting days, going out to the Inderland Audubon wetland for the trash cleanup. All of this stuff is really important. And then of course, supporting those groups to empower them to do the work that they need to do. I think capacity is hugely underrated. This stuff takes a lot of work. So showing up is super important, but also supporting the folks that are doing the work day in and day out.
It really
Lily,
is.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was told when I moved to Bozeman that the soil is so deep here, we like have 4 feet of soil and a good bit of Bozeman under the downtown because much of it at one time was beaver ponds, and thus all of the beaver dams backed up the sediment, and we have really deep soil here as opposed to maybe out in Belgrade where they have very little topsoil at all. But so if a good bit of Bozeman at one time was wetland, does anyone have a clue of a way to determine how much wetland we've lost from the Gallatin watershed? I mean, do we have a clue how many acres have been lost or what percentage? Is anyone kind of honing in on that in any way?
Yeah, Chris. So how far back do you want to go? I think
Let's go back to, I don't know. Like when Bozeman was settled, maybe, do we have a way?
How about late Pleistocene? No.
So, you know, I don't have a great answer, but a couple groups like the local water quality district did some, they looked into that some, but then also I'm really excited about this. The Natural Heritage Program will be updating their wetland maps for our area this summer. And that's funded through the Department of Environmental Quality. And that's has a lot to do with the Gallatin watershed being the DEQ's next focus watershed. So because DEQ is anticipating investing a lot in our watershed to help restore and protect it, you know, to improve that water quality, they're updating these wetland maps. And then we're going to have a pretty good, you know, before and after data set with those Natural Heritage Program wetland maps. So really looking forward to that. I also know that so another group to give a shout out to is the Four Corners Foundation, and they've been funding some geospatial analysis with Nick Silverman, looking at aerial imagery and the shifts in wet land. So not necessarily delineated wetlands, but wet land year to year. And we're hoping that we can work with Nick to build that analysis out. But that's all supported by the Four Corners Foundation. So not a great answer, Chris, but I think we're working on it.
Thank you.
We've got a couple other hands raised. One is John Edwards, our vice president. He's had his hand up for a while. Thanks for being patient, John. If you'd like, go ahead and ask your question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, this is John Edwards, and we had an earlier question from someone who said, how can I get involved? And earlier, Lily made the comment that Sacagawea Audubon, Mars, the Gallatin Watershed Council, Ducks Unlimited, and Trout Unlimited had put together a joint letter to the Gallatin County on their draft growth policy. And in that letter, we recommended to the county that they develop an action plan to implement in the next couple years, to put together a program so we don't have any more loss of wetland in our watershed. It's specifically trying to prevent what Lily's talking about. So if you want to get involved, the public comment period for that policy just ended last week, but they're going to have another round of public comment after they do their revision. So if you're interested in getting involved from the standpoint of the politics and the lobbying, you should log on to the Gallatin County Planning website and keep track of that policy, because we need people to come out of the woodwork and show the county commissioners and the planning department that the public is really interested in preserving wetlands and riparian areas in our county. It's not just a few, environmentalists. We have 64 roughly people on this call, but I bet there's thousands of people in the county. If they knew what's going on, they would be in support of preserving wetlands. We just have to get out and get their attention and make sure that they're aware of what's happening, because otherwise it just kind of slips under the radar and people aren't even aware that it's happening. So that would be the way that I would say. I understand this is recorded, and I think Lily did an awesome job of presenting the issues. I think if you know people who are interested in this kind of thing, you should refer them to our recorded version. I guess it's going to be available sometime this week. I don't know when it'll become available, but it would be a great way to teach your friends, get them interested in this, and then maybe they get their friends interested in it, kind of like a chain letter. But we're really going to need to get public support. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to lose wetlands as we have been for the last 200 years in Gallatin Valley, because the pressure to develop is so huge. It's hard to overcome. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, John. And I think you bring up a great point that I think if more people knew just how bad it is, they'd be outraged. And right now, there's a relatively small group of very outraged people that are putting a lot of energy into this. And the more people with the more energy that we can mobilize to help share that load. I know John didn't mention, but he read through the entire county growth plan to draft that letter. And that's a massive document to analyze and critique. And that's a lot of work. And I'd like to thank John for being the unsung hero on that project. I know it's something I can't even fathom tackling myself. So the more people we can get involved to really hold our local government's feet to the fire on these issues, the better.
Yeah, and I want to add to that too, and this goes back to some of your illustrations that you put together. We need to bring Three Forks in as well. What we're doing is directly affecting them. What better way? Who has more fight right now than anybody? It would be Three Forks. And I think you need to really take a step back and really try to convince some folks of what's happening and have them join our cause, and everyone in between, because inevitably what we're doing here is going to be affecting them. So that's just another, take a step back, look at, what this whole picture is looking like and how to actually get people together. I think we need to go beyond just Bozeman for this one, but.
And I'd also add to that so I went through and I read a lot of those comments, and I think it was like 3 or 4 people providing comments. So don't feel like your voice is not going to be enough, because actually there's not that many people providing comments, and maybe they got flooded some other way, but those comments are right in that document, and your voice is is going to be, I think, heard if you speak up and provide comment.
Yeah. I got another question for you here. This one's by Sandy Taylor. It says, can you explain the wetlands transfer process and what it means when there are credits sent from Bozeman to Twin Bridges? Can you explain that? It almost sounds like the mitigation thinking, right?
Yeah, so hopefully I'm not off the mark here in answering your question. So hopefully I'm understanding your question correctly. But credits are kind of a complex system, but basically what happens is that when so we want no net loss, and so what happened is there's a bank, the Upper Missouri Wetland Bank was developed over on the Jefferson River, and we had a net gain in wetlands. And so then every wetland that we develop or pave over in our watershed, we then mitigate over into this net gain, and that gets spent down slowly over time. So those credits, these are credits, and they get spent down over time until we get back to this no net loss place. And the reason why, yeah, Travis, go ahead.
Someone spent a lot of money to build wetlands over in Twin Bridges to be a wetland bank to provide ecosystem services. And the way this works is when a developer needs to put a parking lot where a wetland is, they have to pay for that. They have to mitigate that damage. So the money that they pay to mitigate that is being sent to the person who built that big bank over in Twin Bridges for the service of creating this wetland in Twin Bridges. Currently, it's the only wetland bank within our drainage, so they have a cornered market. And until there's another bank that can provide those ecosystem services more locally, that's the only option the Army Corps of Engineers has in terms of directing where those credits go.
And I would say that in lieu fee through Mars could be a more viable option. So we should be able to, a developer should be able to, instead of paying for credits over at the bank on the Jefferson, they could instead direct that money to Mars, which Mars could then invest in local banking projects such as the Audubon's wetland. But Army Corps of Engineers considers that they have a hierarchy that they have to follow, that they are encouraged to follow by this, but they still have discretion, but they consider that wetland over on the Jefferson to be close enough that that takes precedent over using Mars as an in lieu fee program. That could change maybe.
And I'd like to, this is Lorene, I'd like to just piggyback on what you're saying with mitigation bank. So basically, we're selling off our wetlands, or we're not even selling them off. We're paying for somebody to take our wetlands and put it into another watershed. And so those are considered credits. With that said, we're asking our public, our community members here to save water, to put in low flow toilets, low flow shower heads, but yet we are not taking those dollars saved by putting in low flow toilets and protecting our water conservation by protecting our wetlands. So we're just losing all of that work that all of the community is working hard to conserve water, and we're shipping it to another watershed. And we will find ourselves, probably not tomorrow, but in 10 years, in a lot of world of hurt here in the Gallatin Valley.
Yeah.
And so that is the biggest problem with making sure that we have a mitigation process here in the Gallatin Valley so that the credits do stay here in the Gallatin Valley watershed, and we can then build wetlands here in the watershed when we do have to build on wetlands. So.
Thank you, Lorene. We have a question. We have a hand raised. This might be someone related to you, Robert DeFord.
Oh yeah, I don't know that guy.
No. All right.
What are the
You're free
odds?
to open your mic, Robert, and ask your question.
Good evening, Lily. Can you hear me?
I can.
I have a real question. Now, I'm not here to harass you. You did an absolutely wonderful job, and we folks back here in the state of Maryland are very proud of you and for having been used for two very bad examples in your presentation. But my question is this: if you've laid out a very wonderful and convincing argument in favor of wetlands, can you put the other hat on for a minute? If I'm an advocate for something, I always want to know how the other side thinks. And obviously, wetlands in Bozeman and elsewhere are being destroyed at an alarming rate. What does the other side think? What are their arguments? What do you argue against when you go into a public forum? And what are they saying that is winning the battle? And what can you say against that? Thank you.
Jeez.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. You know, I just walked a parcel of land that got platted for subdivided, and you know the plan is to maximize the number of units that they can put on this parcel of land, and they actually want to reroute the creek, and rerouting a creek, I highly doubt they'll be able to do that. But pave over the wetlands, they might be able to do that, and that is to maximize density, and that's actually a pretty compelling argument, again, when we're experiencing growth like we are, to be able to centralize that growth so that we're centralizing those systems like transportation and wastewater and our urban centers. Sometimes those two come up against each other. You know, housing affordability and wetlands can sometimes clash. And I would say, in response to that, that it's just way more expensive down the road. You're going to end up paying for those lost services tenfold if you don't put those protections in place now. So I think it's a weak argument.
But who pays for it? Not the guy that wants to build the development tomorrow.
Exactly. But
He can
taxpayers,
cut and run.
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that
There's a
answer
lot
your
of money.
There's a lot of money in growth right now in Bozeman is the scary thing. And when you see, I think there was a article in the Chronicle just a few weeks ago that showed year to year, March to March, from 2020 to 2021, median home values went up by 60%. 60. That's crazy demand for housing in Bozeman right now. And that's what's driving a lot of the pressure to develop these wetlands. And it's not going to slow down. It's not going to stop. People are freaked out and want to get out of the big urban centers, and they want to come to what they see as the pristine little town in the mountains. And who can blame them, really? I mean, I don't want to live in Chicago or LA. That's why I live here. It's a tough situation we're in right now with the virus pushing a lot of people even harder towards places like Bozeman than ever before. But yeah, all we can do is be vigilant and keep the pressure on the regulatory bodies and the decision makers to prioritize wetlands and continue to fight for those ecosystem services and that wildlife habitat and everything else that those wetlands provide.
Yeah, Travis.
Sorry, didn't mean to
Lily,
steal your thunder,
Lily, I
Lily.
got a question kind of for you that kind of feeds off of what we were just talking about. Like you were talking about centralized populations, like trying to build more volume in like a plot of land. Now, what do you think is more detrimental? As do you think a more centralized location, or should we kind of expand that out? Because I haven't really thought much about it all in this one centralized like location of funneling and waste treatment and things like that. So, what do you think is a worse approach?
It's hard. I mean, I live downtown and we have, high rises going up like crazy, and that's creating a vibrant urban center with high density. But who's going that, like, is that actually providing urban density? Or, what? I think that we just need to be really deliberate about what that infrastructure looks like and what those housing units look like. And so when we talk about the sprawl, I would say, yes, sprawl is going to have a much larger impact on wetlands and those ecosystem services. So the more that we centralize, coming back to Rob's question, that might come at a cost of some wetlands, but I would really urge that if there's one thing to protect, it would be the wetlands, regardless of whether it's in the urban environment or whether it's out in the county at large, because you're just going to get more bang for your buck. You get your open space, you get your park, you get your water treatment, you get your habitat. It can all be accomplished when you're preserving those wetland systems, when you're prioritizing preserving those wetland systems.
Yeah, last time I checked, that one city, one town in Maryland, I don't think it's much of a town anymore. I think it got a little washed away. But yeah, they're pretty important.
But I'd also say, Kyle, that conversation should continue, because that's a hard conversation.
I feel the concentration would be fine, but also that needs to come with certain advances with how we treat certain things in concentrated areas. I mean, like, kind of figured, yeah, an urban sprawl is probably going to have the most dramatic effect. I mean, there's a point where we have to be realistic of what's going on, and it's going to happen. It's like, how do you mitigate it? Like, what is the best thing we can do, right? And so I personally, yeah, I think with that, in concentrations, it just has to come with different technologies that can mitigate it, but that comes in time.
We've got a few other questions here. One is from Joanna McCoy. She asks, I just recently learned that Gallatin County only has 50 feet of setback from high water mark, while Madison County has 100 feet. Are there any plans to expand this? And how does this setback work for wetlands? Here in Big Sky, we are getting ready to fight a huge proposed development up on the mountain directly on the middle fork of the West Fork.
Yeah, so that's, I think if I could wave a magic wand, setbacks would be my magic wand. And that comes back to that image that I showed in that first introductory slide. Rivers move, and the more space that you can give them, the more intact that river corridor is, which includes the wetlands and the riparian areas, the more of a buffer. That migration process can happen at a natural rate, but like let it happen. And those setbacks are there's a patchwork of setbacks across Gallatin County. Because we have a patchwork of zoning districts. We have a lot of unzoned areas in Gallatin County that I believe, don't have any setback requirements, but I'd have to look. 50 feet you might be right there. That's it. But you know, if I could, I'd say 300 feet. And we had sort of an opportunity to do that we pushed for that. The Gallatin Watershed Council pushed for that in the floodplain regulation updates. Unfortunately, the Gallatin County growth policy doesn't have a ton of teeth to establish that countywide ordinance. I've been told countywide ordinances are political suicide and are kind of a no-go, but if we're gonna have one, that's what it should be. You can consider community initiated zoning. So if you live in an area that is unzoned, consider getting your neighbors together and doing a community initiated zoning effort to get those setbacks around your wetlands and your watercourses.
And those can hold political weight. Those can be binding and hard to reverse.
They are they're regulatory, whereas our growth policy is like a vision statement.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's something to be referenced and guide your decisions, but those zoning ordinances are like, this has to happen.
Okay, well, from what it looks like we got 2 more questions, and then maybe we can just get these answered, and then we're gonna wrap it up here. But Seymour, it looks like you also have your hand raised. Can you, if you want, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. And then after that, we'll go to Martha Williams. That's left, and so she's gone. So Seymour, read my question. Okay. His question is, what about the rain garden type of sinks that I see at the Bozeman Library and all around the MSU campus? How much do those help? They aren't wetlands, but they do put water into the aquifer.
Yeah, great. So those rain gardens are great. You're right. We're getting that aquifer recharge. That's slow groundwater movement. So where we're, you know, that it's not going into the stormwater system where things get shipped straight to the river. So it's going to take that raindrop circuitous path and take a long time to get to the river. So they're really great for that reason. But what you're not getting is the water treatment aspect, or at least not to the extent that a wetland would, because they are not this perpetually saturated anaerobic condition.
So by rain gardens, are we referring to like the small section outside of, say, the Home Depot parking lot that has big cobbles down inside it, and I assume that's where all the parking lot runoff flows into that, and it just slowly seeps into the ground?
Yeah, so that would be more like a stormwater detention pond. Rain gardens, you really want the added aspect of the plants.
Okay.
And those plants are,
And they act as like a buffer to suck up, right? A lot of the runoff and things like that.
yeah. So it'll actually, they'll actually use some of that water, but also some of those nutrients. And so you'll get some water treatment.
Gotcha.
And then the added benefit of the little habitat that it provides. So it's a much more like dynamic, vibrant system than just those rocks outside the pond.
Gotcha. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. We've gone a little bit over our time. Lily, thank you so much for tuning in with us and being a panelist speaker for us. I think your message was taken pretty well here, especially now. I mean, like, this is a big conversation that's happening right now in Bozeman, and more important than ever, people need to know what's going on and how this affects us and ecosystem services. I can't, I feel like we don't ever really appreciate it enough until something's wrong. And then we spend so much money trying to fix what we caused. And so thank you for coming on. And we're going to open up all the mics one last time, and y'all can give a big ol' round of applause for Lily here. So we want to read. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Lily.
coming on. Yep, and thanks everyone else for tuning in. And next month's program is going to be about beavers, so the wetland continues. All
Thank you,
right, take
Lily.
care, everyone.
Thanks so much, and thank you for being a champion in our community for this. Really appreciate your work.
Absolutely.
Have a great night, everyone.
Goodbye.